The dust of the parched earth rose in clouds behind Gabriel Harris as he urged his tired stallion onward, the distant silhouette of Copper Creek emerging on the horizon like a mirage. 8 years had passed since he'd last laid eyes on his hometown, 8 long years of drifting from ranch to ranch, cattle drive to cattle drive, running from memories that now dragged him home with the weight of a telegram folded in his breast pocket. Mother gravely ill, come home. Dr. Wilson. He'd received the message 3 days too late. The year was 1878, and the once wild frontier town of Copper Creek, Colorado, had grown in his absence. New storefronts lined the main street, and a proper railway station now stood where once there had been only a wooden platform. Gabriel pulled his horse to a stop outside the general store, his bones aching from 4 days of hard riding. The familiar scent of pine from the surrounding forests mixed with the town's smells of sawdust, horse manure, and cooking fires. "Well, I'll be," a voice called out. "If it ain't Gabriel Harris back from the dead." Gabriel turned to see Hank Peterson, the blacksmith, stepping out from his shop, wiping his hands on his leather apron. The man had aged considerably, his once black beard now streaked with gray. "Not dead, Hank," Gabriel replied, dismounting with a wince. "Just gone." "Your timing's poor, son," Hank said, his voice softening. "Heard about your ma, funeral's set for tomorrow, town's been taking care of arrangements." He paused, studying Gabriel's face. "You look like hell." Gabriel nodded, unable to find words that wouldn't crack with emotion. He'd left Copper Creek at 22, full of anger and wounded pride. Now at 30, he returned with little more than the clothes on his back, a reputation as a skilled ranch hand, and the crushing knowledge he'd arrived too late to say goodbye. "Your ma's place is still standing," Hank continued. "Doc Wilson's been keeping an eye on things." Gabriel nodded again, gathering his horse's reins. "Appreciate the welcome, Hank. I should get settled." The blacksmith reached out, clasping Gabriel's shoulder. "Town's changed some. You might want to as well." The Harris homestead sat a mile outside town, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral that his father had built with his own hands 25 years ago. As Gabriel approached, he felt the years peeling away. The oak tree he'd climbed as a boy still stood sentinel beside the cabin, though it seemed smaller now. The front porch sagged slightly at one corner, and the barn needed fresh paint, but it was unmistakably home. He unsaddled his horse in the barn, giving the tired animal feed and water before approaching the cabin. The key still hung on a nail behind the water barrel, just as it always had. Inside, the cabin was neat but empty, a fire laid but unlit in the hearth. Someone had been keeping it ready. The silence pressed against him as he moved through the small rooms, touching familiar objects that seemed to belong to another life: his mother's rocking chair, the quilt she'd made for his bed, the shelf of books his father had treasured. In his parents' bedroom, he found her things arranged as though she might return any moment. Her brush still held strands of silver-gray hair. The sight of it broke something inside him, and Gabriel sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. He'd written to her over the years, not often enough, he now realized, but had refused her pleas to come home. His father's death from pneumonia 8 years ago had left him with nothing but bitterness toward this town, toward the doctor who couldn't save him, toward the God his mother had trusted so completely. Now she too was gone, and Gabriel was left with the hollow ache of regret. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. He composed himself quickly, straightening his shoulders before pulling open the door. The woman standing on his porch was a stranger to him. She stood straight-backed, her dark blue dress simple but well-made, her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. She held a covered basket in her hands, and her eyes a striking hazel-registered surprise before warming with sympathy. "You must be Gabriel," she said, her voice low and pleasant. "I'm Ruby Wilson." "Dr. Wilson's daughter?" Gabriel asked, his voice rough from the dust of the trail and the emotion he'd been suppressing. She nodded. "My father asked me to bring you some supper and check that the cabin was in order." She hesitated, then added gently, "I'm very sorry about your mother. She was a remarkable woman." Gabriel stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. "Thank you, please come in." Ruby Wilson moved with quiet confidence into the cabin, setting her basket on the kitchen table. "I've brought stew, bread, and pie. Your mother taught me to make this apple pie, actually. It won't be as good as hers, but you knew my mother well." Gabriel asked, watching as Ruby began unpacking the food. "Yes," she replied, glancing up at him. "I came to Copper Creek 5 years ago after my husband died. Your mother was the first to welcome me. She helped me through the worst of my grief." Gabriel felt a stab of shame. While this stranger had been comforting his mother, he'd been hundreds of miles away, carrying his grudge like a badge of honor. "I wish I'd been here," he said quietly. Ruby paused in her task. "She understood why you weren't. She never stopped talking about you, you know. Her brave son, working the big ranches, seeing the country." She smiled slightly. "She kept every letter you sent." Gabriel looked away, unable to meet her steady gaze. "Not enough of them. No parent expects perfection from their child, Mr. Harris, only love." Ruby moved to the hearth and knelt to light the fire. The small flames caught quickly, casting a warm glow through the cabin. "There, that should take the chill off the evening." She stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. "The funeral is at 11 tomorrow. I should let you rest now." "Thank you for the food," Gabriel said, finding himself reluctant to see her go. There was something steadying about Ruby Wilson's presence, a calm strength that reminded him of his mother. "Your mother was kind to me when I needed it most," Ruby replied simply. "I'm just returning the favor." She moved toward the door, then paused. "The whole town will be there tomorrow. Your mother was well loved in Copper Creek." After she left, Gabriel sat at the table and ate the stew she'd brought. It was rich and flavorful, clearly made with care. As he ate, he felt the weight of his return settling over him. Tomorrow he would bury his mother. And then what? He had no plans beyond that, no thought of what might come next. The funeral dawned clear and bright, the kind of autumn day his mother would have loved. Gabriel dressed in his one good shirt and the black string tie he'd purchased in Denver on his journey home. The church was filled beyond capacity, townsfolk standing along the walls and spilling out onto the steps. Gabriel sat in the front pew, acutely aware of the empty space beside him where his father should have been. Pastor Mills spoke of Elizabeth Harris's faith, her kindness, her tireless work in the community. "She nursed the sick, comforted the grieving, and welcomed the stranger," he said. "And she never lost hope that her beloved son would one day return home." Gabriel stared straight ahead, jaw clenched against the tide of emotion threatening to overcome him. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of Ruby Wilson, seated with her father a few rows back. She met his gaze briefly, her expression conveying understanding rather than pity. After the service, the procession wound its way to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking town. Gabriel stood rigid as his mother's casket was lowered beside his father's grave, the finality of it striking him with physical force. One by one, townspeople approached to offer condolences, many sharing stories of how Elizabeth Harris had touched their lives. "She sat with my Mary for 3 nights straight when the fever took her," said Mrs. Lawson, the baker's wife, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Brought me meals for a month after I broke my leg," added old Tom Fletcher, leaning heavily on his cane. "Taught my girls to read, Mrs. Gonzalez said softly. Said every child deserved stories." Gabriel accepted their words with nods and murmured thanks, increasingly ashamed of how little he'd known of his mother's life these past 8 years. He'd been so wrapped up in his own pain that he'd missed seeing the woman she'd become after his father's death, not just a grieving widow but a pillar of strength to an entire community. As the crowd began to disperse, Dr. Wilson approached, a tall man with kind eyes and a dignified bearing despite his advancing years. "Gabriel," he said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you, though I wish it were under different circumstances." Gabriel took the offered hand, pushing aside the old resentment he'd harbored. "Doctor, thank you for sending the telegram. I only wish it had reached you sooner." The doctor's expression was grave. "Your mother's heart had been weak for some time, but the end came quickly. She didn't suffer. Was she alone?" Gabriel asked the question that had been haunting him since he'd learned of her death. "No," Ruby said, stepping forward to join them. I was with her. She spoke of you at the end, said she knew you'd find your way home eventually. Gabriel swallowed hard. Thank you for being there, doctor. Wilson cleared his throat. There are some matters to discuss regarding your mother's affairs. Perhaps you could stop by my office tomorrow. Gabriel nodded, then found himself looking at Ruby again. There was something in her steady gaze that anchored him amid the storm of grief. Will you be staying in Copper Creek? She asked. The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought beyond this day. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't made plans. Well, Dr. Wilson said, there's no rush to decide. Your mother's house is yours now. Take some time. As they walked away, Gabriel stood alone by his parents' graves, the afternoon sun warm on his back. For the first time, he allowed himself to weep, the tears coming silently but steadily for all he had lost and all the years he could never reclaim. The next morning, Gabriel walked into town, the familiar dirt streets now lined with newer buildings than he remembered. Children played in front of the schoolhouse, and women chatted outside the general store. Copper Creek had prospered in his absence, growing from a rough frontier settlement into a proper town. Dr. Wilson's office was attached to his home, a two-story clapboard structure painted a neat white with green shutters. Gabriel knocked on the office door and Ruby answered, dressed in a practical brown skirt and white shirtwaist, her hair once again neatly arranged. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she said. "Please come in. My father is expecting you." The doctor's office was well organized, with shelves of medical books and cabinets of supplies. Dr. Wilson sat behind a desk, reading through some papers. "Ah, Gabriel," he said, looking up. "Please sit down." Gabriel removed his hat and took the offered chair. "I won't keep you long," the doctor said. "Your mother left everything in good order. The house and land are free of debt and now yours, of course. There's a small amount of money in the bank. Ruby can give you the details." He slid a document across the desk. "This just needs your signature." As Gabriel signed, Dr. Wilson continued, "Your mother also left a letter for you. Ruby has it." Ruby opened a drawer and withdrew an envelope, handing it to Gabriel. His name was written on the front in his mother's familiar handwriting. "I'll leave you to read it in private, Doctor." Wilson said, rising, "Ruby can answer any other questions you might have. I have patients to see." After the doctor left, Gabriel stared at the envelope in his hands. "Would you like some coffee?" Ruby asked gently. Gabriel looked up, grateful for the momentary distraction. "Yes, thank you." She moved to a small stove in the corner of the room and poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot kept warm there. Handing one to Gabriel, she sat in her father's vacated chair. "Your mother was very organized," Ruby said. "She came to us about a year ago to arrange her affairs, though none of us expected." She paused. "Well, life often surprises us." Gabriel tucked the letter into his jacket pocket. "Did you work with your father long?" "Since I came to Copper Creek," she replied. "I trained as a nurse in Chicago before I married. When James died, I had nowhere else to go, so I came here to help my father with his practice." "I'm sorry about your husband," Gabriel said. Ruby nodded, her expression composed. "It was 5 years ago, influenza." "We'd only been married 2 years. There was more to the story, Gabriel sensed, but he didn't press. Instead, he asked, "And you've been here since then, helping your father?" "Yes, the town needed medical care and I needed purpose." She took a sip of her coffee. "Your mother understood that. She had found her own purpose after your father died." "I'm beginning to see that," Gabriel said quietly. Ruby set down her cup. "The bank account has just over $300, not a fortune, but enough to give you some time to decide what you want to do next." "Thank you," Gabriel said, finishing his coffee. "I should let you get back to your work." Ruby stood. "Mr. Harris, if you need anything, supplies, information about the town, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." Gabriel nodded, putting on his hat. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Wilson." "Miss Wilson, actually," she corrected him with a small smile. "Or Ruby, if you prefer. Everyone in town calls me Ruby." "Gabriel, then," he replied, surprised by how much he wanted to stay and continue talking with her. There was something about Ruby Wilson that drew him, perhaps her quiet strength, or the way she spoke so matter-of-factly about loss and purpose. But he had a letter to read and decisions to make, so he tipped his hat and left. Back at the cabin, Gabriel built a fire and settled into his father's old chair before opening his mother's letter. Her handwriting was shakier than he remembered, but still distinctly hers. "My dearest Gabriel," it began, "if you are reading this, I have gone to join your father. I hope you are not carrying guilt over being away. I understood your need to leave Copper Creek to find your own path. A mother wants nothing more than for her child to find happiness. I have had a good life here. After your father died, I discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. The town needed me, and in helping others, I found healing. I hope you too have found some measure of peace in your travels. The house is yours now to keep or sell as you choose, but Gabriel, I hope you will consider staying, at least for a while. Copper Creek has changed. There are good people here who would welcome you if you let them. Whatever you decide, know that I have always been proud of you. Your father would be too. He never blamed you for the argument before he died. Neither of you were at your best that day, but he loved you until his last breath, as do I. Find your happiness, my son. Whether it is here or elsewhere, live fully and love deeply. That is all a mother could wish for her child." With all my love, Mother Gabriel folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. His mother's words had cut through the protective shell he'd built around himself these past 8 years. The argument with his father had been over Gabriel's restlessness, his desire to leave the small confines of Copper Creek and see more of the world. Harsh words had been exchanged, and Gabriel had stormed out. 3 days later, his father had fallen ill, and by the time Gabriel returned from his angry wandering, pneumonia had taken hold. His father died without them ever reconciling. Guilt and grief had driven Gabriel away from Copper Creek. Now his mother's letter offered absolution he hadn't known he needed. He stared into the fire, considering his options. He could sell the property, take the money, and continue his nomadic existence. Or he could stay, at least for a while, and discover what his mother had found in this town after he'd gone. The next morning, Gabriel woke early and set to work. The barn needed repairs, the corral fence was missing several rails, and the cabin roof had begun to leak in one corner. Physical labor had always cleared his mind, and by midday, he had made good progress on the most urgent tasks. He was replacing boards on the barn wall when he heard the approach of a wagon. Looking up, he was surprised to see Ruby Wilson driving a small buggy into the yard. "Good afternoon," she called, setting the brake and climbing down. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Gabriel set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Not at all. This is a pleasant surprise." Ruby smiled, and Gabriel noticed how it transformed her serious face, bringing warmth to her eyes. "I brought you some supplies," she said, gesturing to the back of the buggy. "Just basics: coffee, flour, bacon, some preserves. I thought you might not have had time to get to the general store yet." "That's very thoughtful," Gabriel said, moving to help unload the items. "Please come inside, I can offer you, well, whatever you've brought, I suppose." Ruby laughed, a genuine sound that made Gabriel smile in return. "I brought coffee," she said, "and I baked bread this morning." Inside the cabin, Gabriel busied himself building up the fire while Ruby arranged the supplies on the kitchen shelves. "You've been working hard," she commented, noting the newly repaired table leg and the freshly swept floors. "Keeping busy," Gabriel replied, "helps me think." Ruby nodded in understanding. "Have you decided how long you'll stay?" Gabriel poured water into the coffee pot and set it on the stove. "I'm not sure yet. There's a lot to do here, repairs that my mother couldn't manage. I feel I owe her at least that much." Ruby was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your mother spoke of you often, you know. She was proud of you." "So her letter said," Gabriel replied softly. "I wish I'd been a better son." "We all wish we'd done things differently with those we've lost," Ruby said, her voice gentle but firm. "But regret is a poor companion for the journey forward." Gabriel looked at her curiously. "You sound like you've had some experience with that." Ruby met his gaze steadily. "When my husband died, I was consumed with guilt. I was a nurse. I should have recognized the symptoms earlier, done more to save him. It took me a long time to accept that some things are beyond our control." She paused. "Your mother helped me see that." "She seems to have helped a lot of people," Gabriel said. "Yes," Ruby agreed. "After your father died, she channeled her grief into service. She became the person everyone turned to in times of trouble. She smiled slightly. She told me once that helping others was the surest way to heal your own heart. The coffee began to boil, and Gabriel moved to tend to it, grateful for the momentary distraction. Ruby's words had struck a chord, making him wonder if his years of wandering had been a form of running rather than healing. As they sat at the table with coffee and fresh bread, Gabriel found himself curious about the woman across from him. "How did you end up in Copper Creek? It's not exactly Chicago." Ruby broke off a piece of bread. "My father wrote that he needed help. The town was growing and he couldn't manage all the medical needs alone. After James died, I had nothing keeping me in Chicago, the memories there were." She shook her head. "It was easier to start fresh somewhere new, and you found what you needed here?" Gabriel asked. "Not at first," Ruby admitted. "I was still very angry at God, at fate, at my own inadequacies as a nurse, but your mother," she smiled at the memory. "She simply wouldn't let me wallow in self-pity. She kept bringing me into the community, insisting I use my skills, making me see that I still had value to offer." Gabriel nodded, understanding all too well. She could be persistent. "Stubborn as a mule, she once told me," Ruby said with a laugh. "Said you got that trait from her." Gabriel smiled, feeling a connection to his mother he'd been missing. She was right about that. They talked easily as they finished their coffee, Ruby sharing stories of the town's changes, and Gabriel recounting some of his experiences on different ranches. It was the longest conversation he'd had with anyone in months, and he was surprised by how comfortable it felt. As Ruby prepared to leave, she hesitated by the door. "There's a harvest social at the church on Saturday evening. The whole town will be there. You'd be welcome to come." Gabriel hadn't expected the invitation. "I'm not much for socials these days." "I understand," Ruby said, no judgment in her tone, "but if you change your mind, it starts at 6. She climbed into her buggy. "And Gabriel, your mother would be pleased to see you fixing up the place." As she drove away, Gabriel felt something shifting inside him. The conversation with Ruby had been easy, natural in a way human interaction hadn't been for him in years. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, to keeping his thoughts and feelings tightly contained. But Ruby's straightforward manner and quiet understanding had momentarily breached his defenses. The next few days passed quickly as Gabriel threw himself into repairs around the property. He replaced rotten boards on the porch, patched the roof, and cleared the overgrown garden plot. Each task completed felt like a small tribute to his mother, an acknowledgement of the care she'd taken of the place despite her diminishing strength. In town, he purchased supplies and slowly reacquainted himself with Copper Creek. Some faces were familiar, others new, but all seemed to have a story about Elizabeth Harris's kindness. The town had indeed changed. There was now a proper hotel, a milliner's shop, even a small newspaper office. But the essential character remained. A community of people making their way on the frontier, depending on one another when times grew hard. Saturday evening arrived, and Gabriel found himself standing before the small mirror in his bedroom, attempting to tame his unruly dark hair. He decided to attend the social, telling himself it was merely to thank the townspeople for their care of his mother. But in truth, the prospect of seeing Ruby again had influenced his decision more than he cared to admit. The church hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty pumpkins, corn shocks, and baskets of apples. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the gathering, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes in one corner. Gabriel hesitated in the doorway, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd been in such a crowd. "You came," a voice said beside him, and he turned to find Ruby, dressed in a rust-colored dress that complemented her chestnut hair, now arranged in loose curls around her face. "I decided I could use a night away from repairs," Gabriel replied, struck by how the lantern light softened her features. "Well, I'm glad," Ruby said. "Come, let me introduce you to some people. There are quite a few new families since you left." Gabriel allowed her to guide him through the room, grateful for her easy social grace as she introduced him to townspeople. He met the new schoolteacher, the owner of the hotel, and several ranching families who had settled in the area over the past few years. "Gabriel Harris, as I live and breathe," a familiar voice called out. Gabriel turned to see Sarah Jenkins, a childhood friend who had once been sweet on him. "Sarah," he said, genuinely pleased to see her, "it's been a long time." 8 years and then some, she agreed, her eyes twinkling. "And here you are, handsome as ever." She turned to the man beside her. "This is my husband, Daniel Cooper. Daniel, this is Gabriel Harris, the boy who once put a frog in my lunch pail." Daniel laughed, extending his hand. "Pleased to meet you. Sarah's told me all about your childhood mischief." "Not all of it, I hope," Gabriel replied, shaking the man's hand. "For the sake of my reputation." As they chatted, Gabriel noticed Ruby had stepped back, giving him space to reconnect with old friends. She was speaking with her father across the room, but her eyes met Gabriel's briefly, a small smile crossing her lips before she turned back to her conversation. The evening progressed pleasantly. Gabriel found himself drawn into the community's rhythms more easily than he'd expected. He danced with several women, including Sarah and the mayor's wife, each expressing condolences for his mother while sharing fond memories of her. Later, as he helped himself to punch, Ruby appeared at his side again. "You're making quite an impression," she said. "Half the unmarried women in town are asking about you." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Only half? I must be losing my touch," Ruby laughed. "The other half are too shy to ask, but they're watching you all the same." "And what about you, Miss Wilson?" Gabriel asked, surprising himself with his boldness. "Are you watching me too?" A faint blush colored Ruby's cheeks. "I observe everyone, Mr. Harris. It comes with being a nurse." "Would you care to dance?" Gabriel asked, setting down his cup. "Or does your professional observation preclude participation?" Ruby's eyes sparkled with amusement. "I suppose one dance wouldn't compromise my objectivity." As he led her onto the floor, Gabriel was acutely aware of the warmth of her hand in his, the graceful way she moved, and the subtle scent of lavender that surrounded her. The musicians were playing a waltz, and as they moved together, Gabriel found himself more at ease than he had been in years. "You dance well for a cowboy," Ruby remarked. "My mother insisted I learn," Gabriel replied. "Said no son of hers would shuffle around a dance floor like a bear with sore paws." Ruby laughed. "That sounds like Elizabeth." As they continued to dance, Gabriel found himself studying Ruby's face, the intelligence in her hazel eyes, the small scar near her temple, the determined set of her chin. She was not conventionally beautiful in the way that had typically attracted him, but there was something compelling about her, a depth and steadiness that drew him in. "You're staring, Mr. Harris," she said quietly. "Gabriel," he corrected her. "And yes, I suppose I am. Forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," she replied, "though I wonder what you see that's so fascinating." Gabriel considered his answer carefully. "A woman who has known sorrow but hasn't been broken by it, that's a rare quality." Ruby's expression softened. "We all carry our sorrows, Gabriel. The trick is not to let them define us." The dance ended, and Gabriel reluctantly released her. Before he could speak again, they were interrupted by Mrs. Lawson, who needed Ruby's help with a child who had eaten too many sweets and was now feeling ill. "Duty calls," Ruby said with a small smile. "Thank you for the dance, Gabriel." As she walked away, Gabriel felt a strange mixture of emotions, a lightness he hadn't experienced in years, combined with an unexpected longing. Ruby Wilson had somehow slipped past his carefully constructed defenses, awakening feelings he'd thought long buried. The social continued late into the evening, but Gabriel found his attention repeatedly drawn to Ruby as she moved through the crowd, speaking with various townspeople, always with the same attentive focus. She danced with several other men, including the young banker and the blacksmith's son, but Gabriel was gratified to note that she didn't seem to smile at them quite the way she had with him. As the gathering began to disperse, Gabriel found himself walking Ruby and her father home, their house being on the way to his own property. "It was a fine evening," Dr. Wilson commented as they strolled through the quiet streets. "Good to see so many folks coming together." "Yes," Gabriel agreed. "I'd forgotten what these gatherings were like. Community is essential out here," the doctor said. "Isolation is the real enemy on the frontier, more than Indians or outlaws or harsh winters." Gabriel nodded, thinking of his years of solitary wandering. "I've come to see the truth in that." At the Wilsons' front gate, the doctor excused himself, claiming fatigue, but Gabriel suspected the old man was deliberately giving them a moment alone. "Thank you for encouraging me to come tonight," Gabriel said as they stood in the moonlight. "It was good to reconnect with the town." "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Ruby replied. "Everyone was pleased to see you there. Your mother would have been happy too." Gabriel nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to take his leave. "Ruby, I was wondering if— that is, would you consider going for a ride with me tomorrow, after church, perhaps? The weather's supposed to be fine, and I thought you might enjoy seeing the aspen groves up by Miller's Creek. The leaves are turning now." Ruby looked surprised but pleased by the invitation. "I'd like that very much. After dinner, around 2 o'clock, I'll come by with the buggy," Gabriel confirmed, a sense of anticipation rising within him. Ruby smiled. "Good night, Gabriel." "Good night, Ruby." As Gabriel walked home under the star-filled sky, he realized that for the first time since receiving the telegram about his mother, he was looking forward to tomorrow with something other than dread or resignation. The thought of showing Ruby the autumn colors in the hills filled him with an unexpected joy, a sense of possibility he'd almost forgotten could exist. Sunday morning found Gabriel in church for the second time in a week, something that hadn't happened in 8 years. He sat in the same pew his family had always occupied, aware of curious glances from the congregation, but focusing instead on Pastor Mills's sermon about new beginnings. "The Lord tells us, 'Behold, I make all things new,'" the pastor said, his voice carrying through the small church. "Even in our darkest moments, the promise of renewal awaits us if we have the courage to embrace it." Gabriel's eyes drifted to where Ruby sat with her father several rows ahead. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass window cast colored patterns across her profile as she listened attentively to the sermon. As if sensing his gaze, she turned slightly, meeting his eyes briefly before returning her attention to the pastor. After the service, Gabriel declined several invitations to Sunday dinner, explaining that he had plans for the afternoon. The knowing looks from several of the older women in the congregation made it clear that his interest in Ruby Wilson hadn't gone unnoticed. At 2 o'clock precisely, Gabriel arrived at the Wilsons' house with his mother's buggy, freshly cleaned and polished for the occasion. Ruby emerged wearing a forest green riding outfit and a matching hat with a small feather, looking both practical and elegant. "You look lovely," Gabriel said, helping her into the buggy. "Thank you," she replied with a smile. "I don't often have occasion to wear this. Most of my work keeps me in more practical attire." As they drove through town and into the countryside, conversation flowed easily between them. Gabriel found himself sharing stories of his travels, the cattle drives to Kansas, the winter he'd spent in Wyoming, the characters he'd met along the way. Ruby, in turn, told him more about her life in Chicago, her nursing training, and her brief marriage to James Wilson, a doctor she'd met at the hospital. "He was brilliant," she said, a fondness in her voice that held no bitterness. "Devoted to his patients, determined to implement the newest medical practices. When the influenza epidemic hit, he worked day and night, barely sleeping. In the end, I think his exhaustion made him more vulnerable to the disease." "I'm sorry," Gabriel said, sensing the depth of her loss. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Ruby agreed. "I was angry for a long time after he died. I felt cheated of the future we'd planned. But eventually I came to see that I was fortunate to have loved him at all, even if only for a short time." Gabriel nodded, understanding. "My father used to say that life doesn't guarantee us fairness, only opportunities. It's what we do with them that matters." "Your father sounds wise," Ruby said. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you," Gabriel replied with certainty. He appreciated straightforward people who weren't afraid of hard work. They reached the aspen grove, the trees ablaze with golden leaves that shimmered in the afternoon sunlight. Gabriel helped Ruby down from the buggy and spread a blanket on the ground beneath the trees. From a basket, he produced bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of cider he'd purchased from Mrs. Lawson. "This is magnificent," Ruby said, gazing up at the canopy of gold above them. "I've ridden past here many times, but I've never stopped to really look." "My father used to bring us here every autumn," Gabriel explained, handing her a cup of cider. He said it was God's way of reminding us that change can be beautiful. They ate and talked as the sun moved across the sky, dappling the ground around them with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Gabriel found himself studying Ruby's face as she spoke, noticing the animation that transformed her features when she discussed her work or described a patient who had particularly touched her. "You truly love what you do," he observed. Ruby nodded. "I do. There's something profound about being with people in their most vulnerable moments, births, deaths, illnesses. It's a privilege, really, even when it's difficult." "I've never felt that kind of purpose," Gabriel admitted. "These past 8 years, I've been good at my work, but it's never been more than a way to earn my keep and keep moving." "And now," Ruby asked, her hazel eyes searching his face, "what are you looking for now, Gabriel?" The directness of her question caught him off guard, but he found himself answering with equal honesty. "I'm not sure yet. Coming home has made me realize how empty these years have been. I've seen a lot of country, worked alongside good men, but I haven't built anything lasting." He paused. "My mother's letter asked me to consider staying, at least for a while. And will you?" Ruby's voice was soft, but her gaze remained steady. "I'm beginning to think I might," Gabriel replied, surprising himself with the admission. "There's work to be done on the property and Copper Creek." He glanced at her. "The town has more to offer than I remembered." Ruby smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I'm glad to hear that." As the afternoon waned, they packed up their picnic and drove slowly back toward town. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, gilding the landscape with warm light. Gabriel was reluctant for the day to end, savoring the comfortable silence that had developed between them. "Thank you for today," Ruby said as they approached her house. "It's been a lovely afternoon." "The pleasure was mine," Gabriel replied sincerely. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime." Ruby's smile was answer enough. "I'd like that very much." Standing on her porch, Gabriel found himself wanting to prolong their goodbye. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you officially, Miss Wilson?" Ruby's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Why, Mr. Harris, I believe that would be entirely proper." Gabriel took her hand and on impulse raised it to his lips. "Until then, Ruby." As he drove home in the gathering dusk, Gabriel felt a lightness in his spirit that had been absent for years. The day with Ruby had awakened something in him, a sense of possibility, of future rather than just past. For the first time since receiving the news of his mother's death, he felt truly alive again. Over the next few weeks, Gabriel fell into a new rhythm of life in Copper Creek. He continued to work on the homestead, but also began to reintegrate himself into the community. He attended church regularly, joined the volunteer fire brigade, and even helped with the raising of a new barn for the Petersons when their old one was destroyed in a lightning strike. And at the center of this new life was Ruby Wilson. They saw each other frequently, sometimes for planned outings, other times crossing paths as they went about their daily activities in town. Gabriel found reasons to visit the doctor's office, and Ruby occasionally brought food or supplies to the homestead. Their courtship progressed at a deliberate pace, each encounter deepening their connection. One evening in late October, Gabriel was helping Ruby close up the doctor's office after her father had retired early with a head cold. "I received a letter today," Gabriel said as he stacked chairs against the wall. "From the Circle T Ranch in Texas. I worked there for almost 2 years before coming home." Ruby looked up from the medicines she was organizing. "Oh, good news, I hope." "An offer," Gabriel replied. "The foreman's retiring next spring. They want me to take his place." Ruby's hands stilled, but her expression remained composed. "That sounds like a significant opportunity." Gabriel nodded. "It would be good work, good pay. I know the operation well." "I see," Ruby said quietly. "When would you need to leave?" "February, to be there for spring roundup." Gabriel moved closer to her. "But I'm not going to take it." Ruby's eyes widened. "You're not, but if it's a good position, it is," Gabriel interrupted gently. "But my life is here now. I've decided to stay in Copper Creek." The relief that washed over Ruby's face was unmistakable, though she tried to maintain her composure. I'm glad to hear that, Gabriel. The town has benefited from your presence these past weeks." Gabriel reached out, taking her hands in his. It's not the town that's keeping me here, Ruby. It's you. Ruby's breath caught. Gabriel. I know it's soon, he continued. We've only known each other a short time, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. When I think about my future, I can't imagine it without you in it. Ruby's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I've been afraid to hope, she admitted. After James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to find someone who would make me feel this way again. Gabriel raised a hand to her cheek. I'm not asking for promises yet. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I'm staying in Copper Creek because this is where I want to build my life with you if you'll have me. Ruby leaned into his touch. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you came home, she whispered. Gabriel's heart swelled at her words. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and kissed her. Her lips were soft beneath his, hesitant at first, then responding with a warmth that sent his pulse racing. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing unevenly. I love you, Ruby Wilson, Gabriel said, the words feeling right and true as they left his lips. Ruby smiled up at him, her eyes shining. And I love you, Gabriel Harris. In that moment, in the quiet of the doctor's office with night falling outside, Gabriel felt the last of his restlessness fade away. He had spent 8 years running from grief and guilt, only to find that healing had been waiting for him in the place he'd been running from all along. As winter settled over Copper Creek, Gabriel continued to court Ruby with a dedication that became the talk of the town. They were seen together at church socials, sharing meals at the hotel restaurant, and taking drives in his buggy despite the cold weather. Dr. Wilson observed their growing attachment with approval, telling Gabriel privately that he hadn't seen his daughter so happy since before her husband's death. Gabriel's homestead underwent a transformation as well. With help from friends in town, he repaired the barn completely, added a new room to the cabin, and purchased 2 milk cows and a small flock of chickens. It was clear to everyone that he was putting down roots, preparing for a future in Copper Creek. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive spirit that permeated the town. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and every home displayed candles in the windows. For Gabriel, it would be his first Christmas without his mother, but also his first in 8 years with a community around him. On Christmas Eve, after the church service, Gabriel invited Ruby to his home for a private celebration. He had spent days cleaning every corner of the cabin, decorating a small pine tree with ornaments he'd found in his mother's trunk, and cooking a dinner that taxed his limited culinary skills to their utmost. Ruby arrived in a red dress that complemented her coloring beautifully, her cheeks flushed from the cold and her eyes bright with anticipation. Gabriel helped her remove her coat, momentarily stunned by how lovely she looked in the warm glow of the firelight. "Merry Christmas, Gabriel," she said, handing him a small, wrapped package. "Merry Christmas, Ruby," he replied, leading her to the table he'd set with his mother's best china. "I hope you're hungry. I may have overestimated how much food 2 people can eat." Ruby laughed, surveying the feast he'd prepared: roast chicken, potatoes, carrots, fresh bread, and an apple pie that Mrs. Lawson had helped him bake. "It looks wonderful. I'm touched that you went to so much effort." The evening passed in comfortable conversation and laughter. Gabriel told stories of Christmases from his childhood, and Ruby shared memories of holiday traditions from her years in Chicago. As they finished their meal, Gabriel grew quieter, a nervous energy building inside him. "Shall we exchange gifts?" Ruby suggested, noticing his distraction. Gabriel nodded, retrieving a small box from the mantelpiece. They moved to sit by the fire, and Ruby handed him her package first. Inside, Gabriel found a beautiful pocket watch, silver with his initials engraved on the case. "Ruby, this is too generous," he said, admiring the craftsmanship. "Open it," she urged. Inside the cover, she had placed a small photograph of his mother, one he'd never seen before. She was smiling, looking more peaceful and content than he remembered. "I took this last summer," Ruby explained softly. "She was having a good day. We were in her garden, and she was telling me stories about when you were a boy." Gabriel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," he managed. "This means more to me than I can say." Ruby squeezed his hand. "I thought you might like to carry her with you." Gabriel took a deep breath, then handed her the small box he'd been holding. "Your turn." Ruby carefully unwrapped the package and opened the velvet box inside. Her breath caught as she saw the ring, a delicate gold band set with a small diamond flanked by 2 emeralds. "It was my grandmother's," Gabriel said, his voice husky with emotion. "My mother kept it for me, hoping someday I'd find the right woman to give it to." He took the box from her hands and knelt before her. "Ruby Wilson, these past months have shown me what it means to truly love someone. You've brought light back into my life when I thought the darkness would never lift. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Ruby's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Gabriel, yes, with all my heart." Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and passion he felt. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless and smiling. "I never expected this," Ruby said, looking at the ring on her finger with wonder. "When you first rode into town for your mother's funeral, I never imagined that the prodigal son would fall in love with the doctor's daughter," Gabriel finished for her, his eyes crinkling with happiness. "My mother probably saw it coming before either of us did. She always did have a knack for seeing the heart of things." Ruby laughed softly. "She did mention once that she hoped you'd find a sensible woman when you finally came home. I think she was worried you'd bring back some saloon girl from your travels." Gabriel chuckled. "Little did she know I'd find someone far more extraordinary than I deserved." They spent the rest of the evening planning their future together. Ruby would continue to work with her father, whose health was beginning to fail, while Gabriel would focus on making the Harris homestead productive again. They decided on a spring wedding when the wildflowers would be blooming on the hillsides. As midnight approached, Gabriel walked Ruby home through the silent, snow-covered streets. The stars blazed overhead in the clear winter sky, and their breath formed clouds in the frigid air. "I feel like I'm dreaming," Ruby said, her hand warm in his. "If someone had told me a year ago that I would be engaged to be married again, I would never have believed them." "Life has a way of surprising us," Gabriel replied, thinking of how much had changed since he'd received that telegram months ago. "My father used to say that God's plans are bigger than our expectations." "Your father was a wise man," Ruby said. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have loved you," Gabriel assured her, "almost as much as I do." At her door, they shared one more kiss before reluctantly parting. "Merry Christmas, my love," Gabriel whispered against her lips. "Merry Christmas, Gabriel," Ruby replied. "The first of many we'll share." As Gabriel walked home through the quiet town, he felt a profound sense of peace. The grief of losing his mother would always be with him, but it was now balanced by the joy of finding Ruby. He looked up at the star-filled sky, silently thanking his mother for her final gift, bringing him home to find the love that would heal his wounded heart. Spring arrived in Copper Creek with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. The town buzzed with excitement over the upcoming wedding of Gabriel Harris and Ruby Wilson, scheduled for the first Saturday in May. Women gathered to help with preparations, men offered assistance with practical matters, and children picked flowers for the church decorations. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. In the small room at the back of the church, Gabriel adjusted his string tie for the 3rd time, his fingers unusually clumsy with nerves. "Stop fussing," Hank Peterson said with a chuckle. "You look fine." "Better than fine," added Tom Fletcher, who had agreed to stand as Gabriel's witness. "Ruby's a lucky woman." Gabriel shook his head. "I'm the lucky one," he said, thinking of the remarkable woman who had agreed to share her life with him. Across town, in her father's house, Ruby was being helped into her wedding dress by Sarah Cooper and Mrs. Lawson. The gown was ivory satin with lace trim, simple but elegant, befitting a woman of Ruby's practical nature. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Lawson said, adjusting the wreath of wildflowers that crowned Ruby's loose curls. "Gabriel won't be able to take his eyes off you," Sarah added with a smile. Ruby's father knocked gently at the door. "It's time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The church is full, and that young man of yours is looking mighty anxious to see his bride." Ruby took her father's arm, her heart fluttering with anticipation. "I'm ready, father." The church was indeed filled to capacity, with townsfolk and ranchers from miles around gathered to witness the union. As Ruby walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes locked with Gabriel's, and the rest of the world seemed to fade away. He stood tall and handsome at the altar, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with love as they followed her progress. Pastor Mills led them through their vows, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church. When Gabriel slipped the gold band onto Ruby's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, his voice clear and certain as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. "By the authority vested in me," Pastor Mills concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled warmly at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Gabriel." Gabriel needed no further encouragement. Drawing Ruby into his arms, he kissed her tenderly, sealing their vows with a promise that needed no words. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Gabriel Harris. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables were set up in the town square, laden with food contributed by every household. The musicians played lively tunes, and couples danced beneath lanterns strung between the trees. Gabriel and Ruby moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone. "Your mother would be so proud," Mrs. Gonzalez told Gabriel, patting his arm affectionately. "She always said you'd come home when the time was right." "I believe she had a hand in bringing us together," Gabriel replied, looking at Ruby with adoration, even from beyond. As twilight deepened into night, Gabriel led Ruby to his waiting buggy, now decorated with ribbons and flowers. They would spend their wedding night at the homestead before leaving the next day for a short honeymoon in Denver. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Harris?" Gabriel asked, helping her into the buggy. Ruby's smile was radiant in the moonlight. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." The ride to the homestead was quiet, both of them wrapped in the wonder of the day and the anticipation of the night ahead. When they arrived, Gabriel surprised Ruby by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home," he said softly, setting her down in the main room of the cabin. Ruby looked around in amazement. The cabin had been transformed in her absence that day. Fresh flowers stood in vases on every surface, candles cast a warm glow throughout the room, and the bed in the new bedroom was turned down, strewn with rose petals. "Gabriel," she breathed. "It's beautiful." "Not half as beautiful as you," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "I still can't believe you're my wife." "Believe it," Ruby whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you, Gabriel Harris." "And I love you, Ruby Harris," he replied, before claiming her lips in a kiss that expressed all the passion and tenderness he felt for the woman who had brought him back to life. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Ruby's head resting on his chest, Gabriel felt a contentment he had never known before. The journey that had begun with the devastating news of his mother's death had led him to this moment of profound joy and hope for the future. "What are you thinking?" Ruby asked, her voice drowsy with happiness. Gabriel stroked her hair, marveling at its silken texture. "I'm thinking that sometimes you have to lose your way completely before you can find where you truly belong." Ruby propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "And have you found where you belong, Gabriel?" He drew her close again, his heart full to overflowing. "Yes, my love, I'm finally home." 5 years later, Gabriel stood on the porch of the expanded Harris homestead, watching as Ruby supervised their twin daughters' attempts to gather eggs from the chicken coop. At 4 years old, Grace and Eliza were bundles of energy and curiosity, with their mother's hazel eyes and their father's dark hair. "Careful, girls," Ruby called as Grace reached for a particularly reluctant hen. "Remember what Papa taught you about approaching from the side." "I'm being careful, Mama," Grace replied, her small face serious with concentration. "I got 2 eggs," Eliza announced triumphantly, holding up her prizes. Gabriel smiled at the scene, his chest swelling with pride and love for his family. The homestead had flourished under their joint care, growing into a prosperous small ranch with cattle, horses, and extensive gardens. Ruby continued to assist her father with his medical practice, though they had welcomed a young doctor from Denver the previous year to take on much of the workload as Dr. Wilson grew older. Life in Copper Creek had been good to them. The town had continued to grow, with a new school building, a proper bank, and even a small hospital in the planning stages. Gabriel had become a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and helping to organize the annual cattle drive to the railway station 30 miles east. As he watched his wife and daughters, Gabriel thought of how far he had come from that dust-covered, grief-stricken cowboy who had ridden into town for his mother's funeral. The journey had not always been easy. They had weathered droughts, a difficult twin pregnancy that had nearly cost Ruby her life, and the normal challenges of building a life together. But through it all, their love had only deepened, growing stronger with each passing year. Ruby looked up, catching his eye across the yard. Her smile, still as captivating as the day they met, warmed him to his core. She said something to the girls, who immediately turned and ran toward him, their small baskets of eggs clutched carefully in their hands. "Papa, Papa." They called in unison. "We helped Mama. We're good egg gatherers." Gabriel crouched down to their level, opening his arms to receive their enthusiastic hugs. "You certainly are, the best egg gatherers in all of Colorado, I'd say." Ruby followed at a more sedate pace, one hand resting on the slight swell of her belly where their third child was growing. "They're becoming quite the little farm hands," she said with a smile. "Though I think Eliza may be more interested in studying the chickens than collecting their eggs." "I want to be a doctor like Grandpa and Mama," Eliza declared seriously. "And I want to ride horses like Papa," Grace added. Not to be outdone, Gabriel laughed, scooping them both up in his arms. "You can be anything you want to be, my darlings. The world is wide open for brave, smart girls like you." As they went inside for supper, Gabriel caught Ruby's hand, pulling her close for a moment. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" he murmured. "Only twice," she replied with a teasing smile. "You're falling behind schedule." Gabriel kissed her softly. "I love you, Ruby Harris, more with each passing day." Ruby's eyes shone with the same love and devotion that had sustained them through the years. "And I love you, Gabriel. Coming to Copper Creek was the best decision my father ever made." "Coming home was the best decision I ever made," Gabriel replied, thinking of how close he had come to selling the homestead and moving on after his mother's funeral. "Though I didn't know it at the time." That evening, after the girls were tucked into bed, Gabriel and Ruby sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Ruby's head rested on his shoulder, her hand entwined with his as they gently rocked back and forth. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come home for your mother's funeral?" Ruby asked softly. Gabriel considered the question. "Sometimes, I might still be drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to put down roots. Or I might have taken that foreman's job in Texas." He squeezed her hand. "But I would have missed the greatest blessing of my life, you and the family we've built together." Ruby lifted her face for his kiss. "I'm glad you came home, Gabriel Harris." "So am I, my love," he replied, holding her close as the night deepened around them. "So am I." In the quiet of the evening, with the woman he loved in his arms and their children sleeping peacefully inside, Gabriel offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. What had begun as a return marked by grief and regret had transformed into a life filled with love, purpose, and joy, a testament to the healing power of coming home and opening one's heart to new beginnings.